Good morning, everyone. Here we are again, BC TechDays 2023, but now in the summer. So that's why we don't have the blouse, we do have now the speaker polo shirt. So if you see those green guys, they're not Muppets, they're just speakers. And I don't know, we also have this wristband. I have no idea what that is for, but we'll find out, I guess, the coming days. Maybe somebody doesn't find out that we are a speaker based on the shirt, so, okay. Whatever. Welcome. My name is Arend-Jan Kauffmann. For the people who don't know me, there might be a few. I'm from the Netherlands, and in this NAV or BC world for 21 years. And always on the technical side, working as a freelance technical consultant and a trainer. And helping a lot of partners with, well, getting ready for the cloud, getting their products ready. And also a lot of API stuff. So that always seems to keep coming to me. In the Netherlands, we also have something that's called the Dutch Dynamics community. I actually retired last week from the committee, but well, I was a co-founder almost 13 years ago. And there's some whereabouts here on the screen if you have the need to find me later or send me a message. All right, so what are we going to do? I have a number of topics today, actually a collection. It's not really a story like building up something. I've collected a number of best practices and tips and tricks for you when you deal with APIs. And we start off with creating APIs. Well, I'm not going to do the boring thing like, hey, this is an API page and you need to set page type API and here are the properties, etc. That's a little bit basic. Let's go with a tool that I use quite often, and that is the creating custom APIs with the wizard that we have in the AZ/AL Dev Tools. This actually a very nice tool where we can generate files, generate AL file, AL objects, and there is a specific mode in there where you can create API pages. And the nice thing with that is that you can fill in automatically some API properties. So as you see here on the screen, we have the default API publisher, a default API group, and a default API version. So with these three, you don't have to type them in, it will do that for you automatically during the creation. You can also turn off field captions, which I think is very useful because APIs do not need captions. I mean, I know sometimes you will need a caption in an API, but just like normal pages, the captions are on the table fields. So there's absolutely no need to put your captions on API fields unless you are using a global variable, same story as with normal UI pages. So why not turn it off for API pages and only add those that you really need? And then what I always do, I always look at what is this API going to be used for? Is it just a service-to-service integration? I do not even use API captions. I mean, why would I? Only if the API is going to be used in a UI page somewhere, like Power Apps or a custom web application, then I may add captions so they can be presented in that UI, including multi-language, etc. Also, application area not required in API pages, so we turn that off as well. And then finally, and that is absolutely powerful, we can convert names. If you have an API that contains the field number, well, in most cases it's in the table called NO dot. Now the dot cannot be used in the name in the API field. So you get a field that is called no. But no is not really a good name for a field. I mean, that has a different meaning. So we go with number. But this tool can automatically convert that for us. So I think that is very useful. And I want to do a quick demo of this. So let me switch to this one here and close this one. I'm going to run that in this one and then say new AL file wizard from the AZ AL Dev Tools. You need to install that, of course, but I assume you all have already. Then there is not an option here for API. You need to search for adding a page. But then in the page, we can switch from page type card to page type API. Well, it's going to be an object name, so let's just say demo items API, and it's going to be the item table that I will be using. So as you see, the API publisher and group and version are already filled in. Entity name and entity set name is going to be something like demo items, and that is the entity name, so this be single, this is plural. Application area will be ignored, so actually it could be removed if there is page type API. And then we can select the fields that we want to have. So I go with the number field, I go with the description field, and whatever inventory field, and some of the system fields. I want to have the system ID included and system modified at. Actually, system modified at is something you should always add to your APIs. That's a best practice. And then it should not have the name system modified app, it should have the name last modified day time. So, no filters, finish it, and look at the result. So automatically, no is converted to number, and system modified at is converted to last modified day time, and system ID is converted to ID. So that works. And that is all due to, again, the settings that we have in here. It searches for the expression. This is the name that he will generate based on the field name. And then you say, okay, if that is going to be the name for line no, it's going to be sequence. That is also a standard, a convention from Microsoft. No is going to be number. No with capital N as at the end of something is going to be number. System ID is going to be ID, and system modified at is going to be that one. You could add description to change it into display name, for example, or name into display name, etc., etc. So, I think a very useful thing. The only thing is, when you add the fields, you need to think about the order. The tool does not allow you to reorder the fields when you add them in the wizard, so you better have the order already in mind and you pick them in the correct order. Otherwise, you need to do that afterwards. Like now, I picked the system ID field later, so it was at the end, but usually the system IDs go into the top. And you need to add the odata key field. That is also, at this moment, missing. So don't forget about that one. Odata key field is going to be system ID. And trust me, if I publish this one, it will just work. But I'm not going to do that demo. There are a lot of other demos here. So that was the first one. Then I would like to dive a little bit into the page triggers. The API is a page. So there are a lot of page triggers there. And what I would like to point out is that those triggers are not always called, let's say, in the same way or as you would expect. So there's a different flow, different set of triggers that execute for a get, a post, a patch, or a delete. I can promise you there will be really some surprising stuff there. Triggers that are always executed for every request is the onInit and the onOpen page. Well, the onInit, we usually use that on a UI page to initialize controls, for example, but in API page we don't do that, so I only write and use the onOpen page usually. So onOpen page it is. You will see some code in there when I come later to some demos. And the query close page and the onClose page will never be executed. So nobody is requesting to close an API page. There's not a user is doing that. So any code in there will just be ignored. When we do a get operation to retrieve a record, that's quite obvious. So we have the onInit trigger, in which you will not be able to see any filters that have been set on the URL, so actually not so relevant for API pages. Then we get the onOpen page, and in the onOpen page, you can read any filters that you have set in the URL, including the filter on the system ID. You can maybe set some extra filters, if you want to, on the record, and you can also use that to initialize a temporary table if your API is based on a temporary table. I will come to that also later, how to deal with that. Then we get the onFind record, which could be alternative to fill a temporary table. I see in Microsoft APIs that they prefer to do it in the onFind record. I don't know why. I mean, onOpen page is good as well. The thing is, in onFind record, that might be executing multiple times. On open page is only one time. And then for every record, you will see the on after get and on after get cur record and the on next record. So, what's going on with the screen? Yeah, I noticed it's flickering, but okay. Should be fine. I hope so. Good. So let me go to Postman and just run a get. Is that working? Probably should do something like this. Yeah? Are you still not seeing it? I mean, I can help you in the back. Okay, so let me then go into this page, API or log API, and there you will see what is going on. So this was the session we just did. We saw an onInit, we see an onOpen page, onFind record, after get current record, and finally an onNext record. If there would be more than one record, it would use that. And about the filters, if there is any filter, let me use that one as well. I'm just going to say I want to get one record and see what happens then. You see in the onOpen page that I know, hey, the system ID was filtered on that value. So that's actually what happens when you do put a value between the brackets. It will be a filter on the page, in this case on the system ID, automatically mapped because of the OData key fields. So the value in the URL is mapped on the OData key field value. Okay, so this is a get, and that is probably not so well surprising. But then we also have the post operation, and the post operation is a little bit different. We have the after the onOpen page, you first get the onNew record, which you can use to initialize a record, or initialize some fields. Then you get a validate for every field in the request body. So not for every field in the API page, but only those fields that are defined in the request body. And the order in which they will be validated is the order in which the fields appear in the API page, not in the request. So you can use any order in the request, but the API page determines the order. And then finally, after the onvalidate of all the fields, you get an onInsert record trigger, which you can use to complete the record, maybe with some other data, or you could even call a code unit, for example, that handles the insert, maybe from a temporary table to a real table. That is all possible there. So there are actually there's one specific situation that is a little bit strange. I will come to that also later with the post operation. I will show you that a post operation also can turn into a patch operation automatically, kind of. So I do a post, but I end with an onModify record instead of an onInsert record. How about that? So let me quickly do that post. So that is the post is creating a record. And then when I look here, I get some new stuff. That is this one here, on init, on open page, new record, field validate 2, 5, 7, and 8, and then finally on insert. So that's clear. I think so far we get it. Now the next thing, which is the patch operation. Well, there are a lot of triggers. What happens is that you get the usual thing, the on open page, but then you get the on find record. Why is that? Because a patch is always on a single record. So you have the system ID in brackets in the URL, so it first needs to find that record. Then it's going to call on after get record to get it, the on after get cur record, and then you get the on next record. I don't know why, it's in a repeater, probably that's why. And then after on next record, you get again the on after get record and after get cur record for the second time. So if you have some code in the on after get record that is doing some heavy calculation, it's going to be executed twice already here in this point. Then we get the validate for the fields, but now something strange happens. Only those fields that do have a changed value will be validated. So if you have a field in the request body that is having the same value as it is in the table, the record, then that field will not be validated. It's not that you can force to validate it in that way. You really need to change the value in order to get the field validate. Then you get the on modify record, and then after that it's going to get the record again and do again an on after get cur record. I don't know why, actually, because the on modify record is supposed to return a modified record anyway, but it happens. So that means that code in the on after get record and get cur record will be executed 3 times. That is a reason to not put code in the on after get record. Avoid that as much as possible. And if you have any heavy coding in there, please do not do that. Try to find another way, or at least do it one time, get a counter or whatever, so we avoid to do that too many times. Okay, that is the patch operation. Let me quickly show you that I was not actually lying. So I take this ID and do that over here. Replace this one. Say send, there it goes, and then find out in this one here that I have actually a new one. On init, on open page, find, again, on next and after get cur. The validate of 2 fields, while here actually I have 4 fields, but only 2 fields did have a different value, so only those 2 fields were modified. And then the modify record, get record, and get cur again. Then we have the delete operation. Well, we have again the same as with the patch. It needs to get that single record that you want to delete. So it's going to be an on open page, find record, then again get cur, next get record, get current record, then on delete, but then it stops. Yeah, obviously, the record does not exist anymore, so another get record is not going to work, of course. The on delete does not even return the record. I'm not going to demonstrate that. I guess you believe me in this. Then that post, turning post into a patch, that is a thing that I actually discovered last week. So I thought that would be a nice demo. When you read the record from a onValidate trigger, on new record will still execute, because that is before validating the fields. But the on insert record will be skipped, and instead the on modify record will be executed. That is strange. And I found out because I was actually playing with global variables instead of field values. And that is also something that, well, is a little bit unexpected. So here I have an example of that. This one. So here I have an API based on the customer table, and I have a field cust name, which is a global variable. Yeah? And what happens if we do this? Then and I thought, okay, I can, in the onInsert trigger, get the customer name and copy that to the record. Well, that actually did not happen. If I call this one with just creating a new company, I get back nothing. See, no ID, no number. And if I look into the log, it's doing on open page, on new record, on validate of that field. But then nothing. It's not going to trigger the onInsert while I was doing a post. Well, and yeah, it's not that I figured this out. Actually, a partner called me about this case. So how could this be solved? Well, actually, it was pretty simple. I could just say rec.name here. And if I publish this one, oh, thanks God to this one, man. If Microsoft can solve this, then many times you have to log in, I will be very thankful. Come on. Do it. Today, yeah, there we go. Go back to Postman, do it once more. And now we have a record. So what happens, and let me go to the API triggers again. Now I have the invalidate cust name, and then I have the onInsert record again. Because now the record has a value, it's one field at least. It figured, okay, maybe you want to insert that record. Okay, but now something strange. What if I give a number in this one, and what I then do in the code is, let's say here, this piece of code. The record number does have a value, and then I say insert from the code. Now this is funny. Because you are in a post, this is delayed insert, it's enabled of course on an API page. So what is going to happen? I would expect an error message. It should be already there. I get on number 60 that value, and if I look into the log, come on, Business Central, speed up. Go down. Oh, whoa, it still does the insert record, while I already inserted it in the onValidate. How that? Gets even more strange. What if I do something like this? I get the record. And now, as you will see, the onInsert is not executed. It will be the onModify. Didn't I authenticate just a minute ago? You know, the strange thing with this is that if I come back tomorrow, it just is happy continuing and doesn't ask me to re-authenticate. It asks me to re-authenticate every minute or so, but not every day. I don't understand. Anyway, let me send this one again. Still number 60. He's not complaining about, hey, that record already exists. And when we look into the log, we see that we get an onModify record instead. But this was a post, so it was supposed to insert. Maybe it could be useful for you, I don't know. By the way, we got back a 201 created as a status. So might be a bug, but actually it helped their partner because they had an external system that was only capable of doing get and post, and they could not do a patch. So they needed to find out the current records, and well, this was a solution that was helping them. All right. Then something that I would like to point out is using temporary tables. Actually, in the Microsoft documentation, they say that paging becomes difficult to do in a performant manner. A rule of thumb is that if you have more than 100 records, don't use temp tables. Documentation. I took this one screenshot from the documentation. But yeah, sometimes you have to have temporary tables. I mean, it's not that you just can live without. Actually, I have to use it a lot. Oops, that was a little bit too enthusiastic. So, what can you do? Well, and the tip here is that, first of all, the point is, the problem with this is that you cannot really use server-driven paging, because it needs to fill the temporary table first, and after that, if you try to do top number of records and skip, or better, you use server-driven paging with the odata next page link, etc. So you say, give me the next 10 or 20 records. It always needs to load the full set of data into the temporary table. So what you can do is apply filters yourself. Force that in code. For example, fill data with a query. That's actually what I did here. This is an example from an API that I created for a customer. And here, what I do is I do a set range. Well, in this case, it was a fixed value. They gave it to me. You should filter it on a dimension code. And what I here do is other filters, and one of them is the get minimum date filter and the maximum date filter. From the unopened page, I fill the temporary table. Now, if we look at the code behind, then let me find that one as well. It is doing something like this. I have a function retrieve posting date from filter, so it must be in the filter supplied. But then I say, well, if the filter is actually not 7 characters, I say, sorry, I'm not going to do it. You must supply at least a filter, and it must be 7 characters because it must be in the format year and month, with 3 characters in this case. So that was the rule, and with this, I forced them to have at least a filter that reduces the number of records to a particular period. So I'm actually forcing the filters. And this is based on a GL entry buffer table, which is a table that is table type temporary. And from the API page, I call that, in this case, get income transactions. There I have that query, and there I have the min date filter, and that is going to force that. And then finally, this is actually a query that I use. In this case, is a query based on the GL account that you could also filter. Then get the GL entries related to that, and then finally get the dimension values related to the GL entries. So all in a query, rather than doing multiple repeats, etc. And then, because I get back a nice query data set, I could easily filter that data set here in the code. This is the set ranges and set filters is actually filters on that query. And by doing it in this way, I can ignore that 100 record limit that Microsoft documents. This can work with a large GL entry table pretty quickly. Okay, then we have something that people seem to be struggling with, so I thought, well, let's throw it in. Bound actions. Bound actions are, if you think about it, actually actions similar to what you have on a page. You have an action in the action bar or maybe on the line itself, and that executes on the current record. So in an API page, you can do the same. You have an action, actually not defined as an action, but as a piece of, just as a procedure. I will show you that. And then that action can also return data. And you have actually two options. Most of you who have been using bound actions know that you can get back the location header. A location header that points to the record that has been updated. That is done with something called Web Service Action Context, and there you define actually a URL by supplying that you want to get the URL for a page. Which page is it, the item API page, and for which entity? So which record do you want to have on the URL? And then you set also result code that it has been created, and that will then return a location header. I'm going to demonstrate that. But another option is to use a value, to let the bound action return a value rather than a location header. So I don't know about you, but I get this question now and then. Hey, can I get a sales price for an item, for a particular customer, for a certain quantity? And yeah, you might think, okay, I cannot do that with APIs. You need to create quite a complex API for that, or I need to go with unbound actions. Well, actually, you don't need that. I'm going to show you a function to get a price on an item and return the price to the caller. So let me go to the code. Bound actions. I have this item, simple item API. The first one is this setDescription. You see here camel casing, by the way. That is for a reason, because bound actions always must be called with camel casing. It has one time cost me half a day to figure out that that is the case, pun intended. If you call it like this with capital S, it's not going to work. If you define it with capital S in the beginning, you cannot call it with capital S. You still need to use lowercase s in the beginning. So for that reason, I use camel casing already here to make clear, hey, this is an API bound action, and you must use that name. Well, this is a very simple one. Set a description on an item. And this is how we use it. I'm going to find at least an item and get the item ID. So the Athens desk, and set that to the item ID. Where is it? Over here. And call the setDescription one, which is on the item API on a particular record, and then followed by Microsoft.nav. So it's a little bit nostalgic here. I mean, it's not .bc or .nav, .setDescription. And this is going to be a BC TechDays 2023 special table. And we should get back a 202 accepted, or 204 no content, also okay. 204 no content, and if I look into the items, it should have that description. Come on. There we are. Here we have the BC TechDays special table. I should have opened this before, so you can actually see that I didn't do this before, but okay, believe me, it works. So what about that location header? I have another one that is going to copy an item. So that is a function .copyItem, and when I do that, of course I want to know where is the item that I now have copied. What is the system ID of that item or the number? Well, for that you need to get a link to the new created item, and that is actually in the headers here, in the location header, and there we get a value, complete value, that I can just use here. Let's say this and say there's going to be a get. And this is the record that we just copied, including the number, etc. So the location header points to the created record. And that works like this. We have a action context. Do not forget to pass it by var, otherwise it will not work. Is a parameter that you do not specify in the request. It is, let's say, an outgoing parameter. And, well, I have this simple code, get the record, copy the record, set the number to empty, and insert it. And then with these three, these are the properties to compose that URL. So it's going to be a page, it's going to be this API page, and this is a system ID. So you do that with set object type, object ID, and add entity key. And then also a set result code, which is created, which is, well, don't see it anymore, but that was the, let me close this one and open it again. Do that post again. 201 created, as you see here. So that is the 201 created that gets back from the service action context. Okay, so what about returning a real value? That's this one. On the same page, I have a getPrice function. And I supply a customer number and a quantity. When I send it, I should get back a value. Come on. There it is. 1000.8. That is the price for this customer for this quantity. Well, actually, it is not. Well, it is the case, but I did not change anything here. So let's do that. Why is Business Central so slow today? Somebody can turn it up, please. So let's go with sales prices and say if all customers order at least 100, the price is going to be $7.99. Okay? Go back here, and there are $7.99. So how does that work? Well, actually, pretty simple. The only thing I do is I return a value. And then you get it in the caller, in Postman in this case. And the way how to calculate a price, I'm not going to use that all the new pricing stuff. I just create a temporary sales header and sales line and let do the work for me. But that is pretty obvious, of course. I hope you're all doing that in the same way. But this one is actually the key. You can just return a value which cannot be combined with the web service action context. If we also add this one to the parameters, it's going to take that as a return, and it's not going to take this one. But this actually works, and, well, something I didn't know for a long time, only discovered also a couple of weeks ago. So maybe you knew it already, but I didn't. Then a small tip about versioning. If you follow Microsoft's way of doing versioning, you just put all your APIs in a separate app, and then when you have a new version of your APIs, you create a new version of that app and change the API version in all individual files. That is an option. What is also an option is to let an API be in multiple versions. In that case, what you do is in the API that changes, you make a copy of that API, and in that API you say, okay, you are going to be the newer version, v1.1 in this case, but all other APIs stay in v1.0. So if they try v1.1 at that point, it's not going to work on all the other APIs. But if you simply do this, API version v1.0 and v1.1, then you change one API and the other APIs are still the same. That is the alternative, so only copying the modified APIs rather than a complete app. It's up to you, of course, which one you prefer. Actually, in many cases, I don't even upversion the API. because in most cases, I own the integration as well, like an Azure function that is calling it, and there's no third party making use of my APIs. Usually I own that API and the other side as well. In that case, yeah, you actually deal with it. You change the API, you change the other side, and you can continue. But if you have APIs in your solution to be used by other partners or customers, then you need to think about versioning, and now you have two options for that. Some magic, relationship between APIs. Well, if you have a relationship like header lines, or here as an example, item variants, where one item can have multiple variants, we define that as a part. Just the normal way how we do that with parts in a header line page. And you point to the other API page, which by the way does not have to be an API page. It can also be just a page of list part. That's also possible. And you define an entity name, entity set name on that. Well, actually only if the other page is not an API page. If the other page is an API page, you can leave out entity name and entity set name here, and you do the subpage link, and that's it. And in that case, you can just do $expand, etc. Well, it is also possible to define that the part is not a one-to-many, but a one-to-one relationship. That is fine. For example, here, item variants, sorry, this one, units of measure. This is the base unit of measure. There's only for one item, one base unit of measure. So we define 0 or 1, and the result will be in the request that you do not get, when you expand it, you do not get an array, but you get a single object. However, there's also something called automatic relationship, and that is actually what I want to point out. And that happens here in these two APIs. I do have an API for items, and in that API I have a few fields, ID and a description, item category and item category code. And I have another one, which is the item category page with just the code and the description. Now the funny thing is that I do not specify here any relationship between them two. I do not specify a part, and do not specify that an item has at least has one item category or 0. But still, what I can do is expand it. So this is my API, and I can say expand item category, and it just works. So that's magic. He is automatically creating a link between the two APIs. And the reason for that is that in the table, we have the fields item category ID and the field item category code, and both do have a table relation to the item category table. And then, when that is the case, the platform is going to find if there is another API for that related table. And if that is the case, it creates automatically the relationship. In older versions of Business Central, it would create that on the first field that appears in the API, which means that if I do this and have the code first, it's not going to work because the other API was based on the ID, the system ID, and not on the code. In the current version, that is not the case. It will say, okay, I find another API that is based on system ID, and I see here that category ID is actually in this page, and category ID does have a table relation to the table of that other API, so automatically link them. You don't have to create the part yourself. A little bit magic, but if you know how it works, it can be very useful and reduce some code. Okay, then partial records. something I would like to point out is that partial record is automatically enabled for API pages. It knows the list of fields that you have in the repeater, and it will automatically apply partial record. So do actually behind the scenes a set load fields. Now that means that if you have any other field that you want to access from code, for example here, I'm going to use the value ID and dimension value code. Actually, I copied this one from a Microsoft API. And those fields, if they are not in the repeater, in the API page, will cause a just-in-time load. That is something you should avoid, and for that reason, in the unopened page, you should add them with add load fields. So because you have that, partial record is not an option. It is there. It is being used by the API pages. So be sure that if you have any code that accesses fields that are not in the API, you use add load fields to add them to the list of fields to be loaded. And your API will be faster, your customers will be more happy with it. A few tips about reducing the payload, which is also, reason for performance reasons. You can use $select to reduce the JSON payload. Actually, there are 4 demos in here. I will just mention them once and then go to Postman. With $select, you say, I want only to see this and this and this field, and that also works on the $expand. You can say from the expanded part, I want to see this and this and this field only. If you want to do paging, you should not use $top and $skip, but you should use server-driven paging with the odata.maxpagesize header. That will return the number of records, including a link for the next set of records with the same count. And then repeat and repeat that over and over again until you reach the end of the list. We have an accept header that we can use to manage the OData tags. That needs a demo. And we can also navigate to a single property. Actually, also needs a demo. So I'm going to be here, reducing payload. Close all the tabs for now. $select. So here I have customers, the standard API, and I tell him to only return the ID, number, display name, and email. Yep, you can expect that, of course. So let me get a new access token. Okay. Why is that? Ah, that is the reason. Here we are. So we have the ID, the number, display name, and the email as we selected in the URL. Well, we can do the same thing with expand. This is a longer one. Don't try to read it. Actually, it's sales invoices. I tell him to return a few fields. I tell him to expand the customer. And on the customer, I want to select only a few fields. I want him to expand customer financial details on the customer. I want to have sales invoice lines as well, for which I want to have ID, sequence, line type, and some other fields. And on the sales invoice lines, I would also like him to expand account and the item, depending on is it a GL account or an item. And on the item, please only return ID, number, inventory. Oh, and please on that item also expand unit of measure. So, talking about a query. Yeah, of course I should have that. This is not because the query is so difficult. Oops, the field contains a value that cannot be found. Ah, so now it's the data problem. Sorry for that. That's funny. Let me just reduce this a little bit. No, I'm not going to do that. It's too much time. It's apparently the data is not correct. But the idea is that you can combine it at least. Sorry for that. Here, I'm going to select customers with only ID and number, and I'll tell him to only return 3 with the with the prefer header. Odata max page size should be 3. Oh, come on. With all of them. Okay, so now I get a next data link that I can just click on and say authorization is going to be auth and use this token. So this is my next one. And then apparently I don't get them all. Okay. Well, the idea is that I should get 3 again. Not so nice that he is not doing that for me. The next link, let me put it in here in. Yeah, well, this one is working. Nobody on it didn't work. So now I get the next 3, and I can get a link for the next 3, and I know why the other one wasn't working, because that header, prefer, was missing. So I should have copied that one as well. And then another link and another link until there's no link anymore. That means you reach the end of the list. So prefer is actually the one that you should use with odata max page size is 3. Then we have the direct navigate. So I have here one item. Why did he not store all of that? Come on. And let's say I only want to know the inventory for this item. Well, you could do $select inventory, but you can also say I want to have inventory, and then you get value 4. And you can even go one step further and say that you only want to have value, and then you only have 4. So if you're interested in the inventory of a certain item or whatever single field, you can do the $select to have that field and then deal with the JSON. You can also dive straight into that field value and get only that value back without any JSON around it. Then maybe you sometimes think, okay, now I'm not buying these anymore. Here we have the standard stuff with the OData E tag. And in the top an OData context. Did you know there's a lot more OData stuff? If we specify that we want to have odata.metadata full, we get a lot more information. We get an edit link, we get the data type for the ID. Well, more information, association, links. You see that? A lot more information. Could be useful, for example, for proxy generators that they know, oh, there's something else, etc. You can also go the other way. You can also specify, sorry, I'm not interested in the OData stuff, so please send me none. And then we have a clean JSON without all that OData babbling in between. I think this can be quite useful, clean JSON, which we can use. All right. The next topic is about a best practice for monitoring your incoming web service calls. Of course, what you should do is use APIs instead of OData and SOAP on UI pages. That's a message that is going out for a long time already. I'm not going to repeat that. Well, I just did. What you should also try to reduce is what is called aggressive calls. You're not going to call a Business Central API 100 times per minute. I only did that in a test to test the performance, actually. You should also check the queues, because the queue in Business Central is a maximum of 100 requests. And 5 requests of the 100 can be processed at the same time. So 95 will be waiting in the queue until the other 5 are ready, and then when the one is ready, he takes the other one from the queue. Now, normal APIs probably is not running into that, but imagine, and I had this actually with some customers, they are also running heavy Power BI queries. So the web service call comes in from a Power BI query, some user is really hacking into it, and it's this data. So that query runs for, let's say, 2 minutes or whatever. And if another user does that as well, another as well, where you feel it, the number of 5 processing slots is reduced to 2. So others, and in this case it was a customer who were using scanning devices, which also integrated with APIs, they only had 2 slots for their API calls from the scanners. So they were going to queue up in the queue and finally even run out of the queue. So you should check the time spent in the queues and also fix non-200 HTTP errors. How can you do that? Well, you use the Power BI based on telemetry provided by Microsoft. You can, with that Power BI, you can check out if your API code is fast enough. You can check if your API calls are getting queued up. Also on what time of the day that actually happens. So are they called aggressively or are they just spread out during the day? And you can find out what is the performance of your calls and what are the calls that do not return at 200 or 201, but return errors or maybe 429, too many requests or timeouts, etc. These are errors you can just find back in telemetry, and from 22.2, I think, they also added telemetry data to find out if a queue entry, so an API request in the queue, was actually timed out because, well, it did not have a time slot to be processed within, I don't know how long that is, takes a couple of minutes at least. But that is testing with telemetry or monitoring. What we also can do is using Postman, actually I do that a lot, to test the APIs. Postman runtime is based on Node.js, and you can add scripts to Postman either before or after the request. So a piece of code that you prepare some variables before the request, and when you get back the response, you can read the response and save that into variables so another request can make use of it. You can also, in the test script, after the response, check the data. Is it still valid? Does it contain the values that you expected? And, well, that actually can be very useful. So, let me give you an example here in Postman. Close all the tabs, okay. In this case, just a very simple one, I have a get, and the only thing I want to do here is test if the return value is 200. So I define a test case with a description, and I tell him that I expect PM for Postman library, the response to have status 200. And if I do that, and I look here into the tests, come on, actually should go one step back. Here I have the test results, and it says status code is 200 with green. And if I would say, well, I expected actually 201, and also the description 201, and do it again and say, sorry, false. It is incorrect. I expected 201, but I got 200. Well, how can we use that? For example, here, I have customers, a customer that I create, and in my test script, I expect the response to be 201. Then I read the JSON data, response data, into a JSON object, and I am going to expect that my JSON data is actually an object, and not an array. Then I have a schema, a JSON schema. Well, let's scroll down. These are defining all the fields that I expect. And then I say, I want to have the response schema to be valid. This is tiny validator that is built into Postman. You should validate the JSON data against the schema and expect it to be true. So all the fields that I expect are in the response. And then I'm going to check the values. So in this case, I'm going to create something with display name, BC TechDays, city Antwerp, etc. And in the test, I'm going to say, okay, I expect my JSON data display name to be equal to that value. So let's see how that works out. And there I have my test results, all green. If you wonder about that schema, because that is actually what you use to find out if all the expected fields are in there, so the structure of the JSON is okay, you can actually generate that schema. I use this free, I like free stuff. So I paste in an example of the output, tell him I'm still not a robot, I wasn't yesterday, and here I have my JSON schema. And that's it. You just copy that, and you go into your test, and you paste it in here. You say, schema is this value. You paste it in there, and you have your schema. And then you only need to test if the schema is valid. So you can just generate it. And if you have optional fields, that you can remove them from the schema. If you read it, it's actually pretty simple. So I've also used that in a slightly different scenario. Here I have a series of requests. And in that series of requests, I want to create a customer, want to create an item with some item name and a price, set the inventory on the created item, which I don't know at this point, so I need to get the value out of that item post before I call this one, and finally create a sales order for, well, the customer ID, the new customer ID that was created, and the new item ID that was created. How does that work? Well, the funny thing is I cannot really demonstrate it, most probably, because I ran out of the maximum number of collection runs. So let me see if I still can do it. Actually, I managed to run 26 out of 25, so actually something went wrong. So maybe it's still not really working. Got 400. Oh, that's also funny. So what is behind this? On my collection, I have a pre-request script. It starts with that. On that pre-request script, I generate some random names. A random company name is a feature from Postman, so I use it. A random product name and a random price. When I run a collection, it will always execute this request script before. I put it into variables, and those variables will stay, will remain during the whole run of the collection. So in my post customer, I can use that generated company name, And I get back a company ID. Let's see why he was actually not doing it. Well, now it works if I do it step by step. So I have a display name that actually was generated by Postman. I get back a company ID, and with my test script, where I test if I actually got back a 201, and if I get the correct schema, etc., I do one more thing at the end, after testing the response. I also say variables set new customer ID based on the output of this request, on the response. And that can then be used in the next one, actually not in post items, but in sales order, because here I have a new customer ID, and that variable is there from the previous request. So in that way, I can actually chain requests and have a complete flow of creating a customer, creating items, and etc. And on every one, what I do is set, in this case, the item ID, then use inventory. Well, I don't need a test script there to set something, but I test if it's actually set to that value. And then I run the complete collection. Let me show you that it actually works, because I have run it before. So this one here, as you can see on the timer, was yesterday night. Not sure if I can see the results. Yeah. So this is how the output looks like. Creates it, I get the response back, the status code, etc., etc. So pretty useful in case you want to run a complete sequence. But it's also pretty funny here is when you want to run, you can not only run the requests that are in a collection, you can also test performance and say how many virtual users do you want and how long do you want the test to run. I cannot run this because it's going to fail, because I actually am out of the maximum number of runs, 25 per month, because I do not have a paid license for Postman, and I didn't want to buy it yesterday night for $380 or something. I thought, okay, I just explain. But using it for performance could be a very good tool for you to find out if multiple users can call those APIs and how fast are they, just from the outside, not from the inside. And it would be very nice to do this and then look into telemetry, what is actually going on, and compare all of that, etc. So just some ways of testing your APIs with Postman. Then the final tip or trick or whatever you want is to consume APIs with C#. If you want to do that, the first thing, of course, is how are you going to authenticate? All that Azure, OAuth stuff, etc. Well, actually, it's pretty simple. You see here a screenshot how I do that with the authorization code GrandFlow. I create, first of all, I take the Microsoft Identity Client package, install that in Visual Studio in my application, and then I use the components in that package to retrieve the OAuth access tokens. You don't have to write any request yourself, use HTTP client or whatsoever. You use the objects that are in that identity client. In this case, I'm using the client application, the public client application builder, because in the example that I was using, I don't have a secret. In that case, it is a public client. If you have a secret, it's on the next slide, then you use the secret client application builder. Well, actually, a confidential client builder. Works the same after all, but then you provide a secret as well. And then you get that piece of code here. I, from the public app, say, hey, do you already have some accounts? If that is the case, or sorry, the first time it's not the case, I go down and say, okay, acquire a new token interactive with the scopes that I define, execute it. That will automatically, in a console application at least, open a pop-up, let me log in, and then return to the application. And in web applications, you can have a similar behavior because it then can be combined with JavaScript, does that on the client side. Then, if there was already an account, I say, hey, try to acquire a token silent. Because there might be a refresh token in it, so it's going to refresh that for me. And if then it comes back and says, sorry, UI is required, for whatever reason, I call the acquired token interactive as well. And with that way, I have it managed from .NET code to get a token, and I can use that token while authenticating with the HTTP client. I will show you the code for that as well. This is the other one for using the confidential client. When you have a secret, then you use that builder with .create with the client ID, and you supply the with client secret. That is also the one that you need to use for service-to-service authentication, which is actually this piece of code. Confidential app.acquire token for client. That's actually the client credentials flow, which is the service-to-service authentication. You tell him the authority, which is quite important because you must specify a tenant ID. Otherwise, you will not get back a token. Execute, get back the result, and you have a token. Before I go to the code and run that, so you can see that it actually works, this is my way of dealing with the data. What I do is I create a C# and C#, I create a class, and in that class I use system.text.json serialization, and I know Newtonsoft has similar things, but I decided to stick with the .NET Core objects here. And on every object, on every property, I have a JSON property name. That maps the output from your JSON automatically to that property in the class. And then you can just serialize and deserialize the JSON data automatically into that class. You don't have to deal with the JSON like we do in AL, like you have to read every single property in JSON. That's not necessary. It's doing that for us automatically. But when we do a get, that get, of course, on a list of records, on a collection, that returns actually not a single object, that returns an array of objects. Well, that array can simply be mapped as well, because we tell him there is something called value in the output, which is an array, so it is an array of customers. And by combining these two, I'm actually capable of retrieving, in this case, customers automatically. So how do I do that? It's here. What I am using is what is called an extension method on the HTTP client called getFromJSON async. I tell him that I expect back a type customers of this URL, companies, blah, 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 the company, and then customers. And then I can simply say for each customer in customers.value, which will be the list of customers. So I only call that function getFromJSON async. I tell him I want to have back customers, and it works. Same goes with posting, so creating a new record. In that case, I use the function post as JSON. I give him one customer, and it will automatically convert that to JSON, send it to Business Central. It's pretty simple. I get the result back from the post. So what I do is on the result content, I say read from JSON. I expect a customer back. and it turns that into a customer object. There's no JSON handling here, all because you defined it one time in the class, and it doesn't have to have all the properties from the customer, only a few, only the ones you're interested in, and it magically does that for you. So I want to show you this code in real life. Come on. It should be opening it. Come on, where are you? There we are. Okay, if you now take a screenshot, you know my secret. I can re-roll that one immediately after the session, of course. So here you see that public app, you see that confidential app client builder. Actually, this application is going to query my Business Central, say, hey, I see 2 environments, which one do you want to open? Then I see companies, which one do you want to open? Hey, I see this list of APIs, which API do you want to see, which category? Then I see some APIs, and then, well, etc. So it builds it up from A to B, and to C to D, etc. So let's run this one and see if it still works. It did so last night. You see it opens a login prompt saying, hey, I want you to open, to authenticate. That's complete. You can return. And here it says, okay, I see in your environment 2 environments under your account. I'm going to use the sandbox. Then it says, okay, I found 2 companies in that sandbox. I'm going to use number 1. Then I see a number of APIs. One of them is the demo API that I was using here in this session. Also have the V2 API. I'm going to use that one, number 18. And then I get 76 APIs found in the standard API. Let's go with items, number 6. Get a question, hey, do you want to call this with the logged in user or as an application, service-to-service authentication? Both work in my case. But here's the data. So pretty simple, straightforward code, actually. Let me quit all of this. Let's do this. And here you also see that code. Where is it for the customer? This is all too many code actually to explain. Where is this? Here. Here's my create customer code that uses the post as JSON. Oops. And he is going to send a customer. And if I go to customer, you see here all those properties being set. So no serialization, no deserialization. Okay, so a list of best practices that I use both in creating APIs and in consuming APIs. With that, I have 10 minutes left for Q&A. And I have this box that I can throw at you. Sorry.
Is it possible to debug web services in BC?
Sorry, say that again?
Is it possible to debug web services in BC?
To do what?
Debug.
Oh, debug. So yes, you can debug APIs. Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
That's no problem. You just use the attach debug session, and then you can work with that. Yeah.
I've tried, but it doesn't stop on breakpoint.
It didn't stop. Okay.
It didn't, yes.
Well, it should.
Okay.
So I tell you it's working, and let me quickly show you how. So let's take that API thingy here. I have here some code on open page, so I do a breakpoint here, then in my launch.json, I should have, and don't have it right now, so I need to edit, attached to the client on the Cloud Sandbox. I'm actually using Cloud Sandbox here. Tell him to use my tenant, which is Kronos.company. There's actually a domain that I own. And then I tell him to debug without publishing, and I want to attach to the Cloud Sandbox. What is important here is break on next is web service client. So now he should start and wait. So let's go to Postman and call this post thingy. And there, my debugger is stopped. So it works.
Thank you so much.
But anyway, because I could now do another demo, you get a t-shirt. There seems to be different sizes, but I hope it fits. Oh, sorry. Other questions? Oh, they told me I can throw it. So I did. The person behind you. The microphone is over there. Guys, you told me, so I did.
Yes, is there a kind of rule, best practice when to use?
I think it's not working anymore. Does it? Okay, try? Yeah, I hear it.
Is there a kind of rule when to use API pages over unbound actions, or what do you prefer in your daily business?
So unbound actions or bound actions?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was quite thrilled about unbound actions because I thought, well, now I can do anything I want. And then you start thinking about it, for what purpose I'm going to use it? And in many cases, a bound action just is enough. So unbound actions, only a few cases, to be honest.
And what other cases in your experience?
Those cases are that when you do something not really related to a record. So starting a process on a record could be a bound action. I really have a hard time to find a good scenario for an unbound action. In most cases, it's just a bound action that works, and an unbound action, yeah. I created a few as demos, but the real world scenarios, I still am looking for it, honestly.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's switch. So you throw it to me. You're good at that. And there. Okay, I saw another one. Try to be careful now.
Thank you. Have you got any comments on transaction handling when you've got, say, 2 simultaneous calls for large sales orders, 200-300 lines, and making one wait for the other?
So you mean
with
the transaction?
APIs? Yeah, within the API.
Yeah, so every request on itself is a transaction. So if you want to have, let's say, multiple transactions, and the one transaction, if that fail, it should also fail the others, then you should use batch requests. Because with batch requests, you can send multiple requests and say they all should be handled as one transaction. Search for isolation. Yeah, I actually, there's a post about that on my blog. Yeah.
Thank you.
Final shirt was that. So is there anybody who wants to ask a question without getting a shirt? You, sir? Look at me.
Okay. I have a question about the REST response standard code. We see before that we test by Postman, for example, the 200 code, 201 code.
Yeah.
But I ask me about 400 code and 500 code. It's all codes are kept by Business Center in API.
Yeah, you mean which codes do
we
exist and what
can
do
receive all set of codes of the REST standard codes.
I'm not sure if Microsoft, the Business Central returns all the codes there are, but yes, they return 400, 401, 429, and all these things, and these are actually documented. Is that what you mean? You don't want to know what they mean?
Yeah.
I'll show you.
I see.
I'll show you. Actually, I have a nice page where you can see what they mean. You can find out what every HTTP status actually means. HTTP status dogs. So here we have 400 forbidden, 404 not found, or unauthorized, or I'm used. No idea what that means. What was the other? Was another one with a, oh here, request entity too large, something like that. So, just with one picture it explains what it means, right? Maybe it's also someone with cats, I don't know. Other questions? You should jump.
You mentioned that you had a problem with a customer that a request was exceeded, like 995 was the queue.
Yeah.
How have you solved that?
We talked to Microsoft if they could do something about it. So now the thing is that we need to also teach those users that, well, they have 20, 30, 50 people in the warehouse working with scanners, and if somebody at the office is going to start a big Power BI query, well, that is going to be intervene with the others. That doesn't work together. So they need to think about it. It's not that we have to solve all those use cases. They also need to be trained on using the resources in a good way. So if running big Power BI queries is actually their need, maybe we should think in that case to go with Azure Data Lake or other solutions where they can run Power BI on instead of querying Business Central directly. So that are discussions. Technically, we cannot solve such a case. There are limits on what you can do.
Thank you.
Welcome. Sorry. Anybody else? You could have thrown that away. Come on. Let me do that. Look at him.
So in this confidential authorization type, you use a secret, right, to acquire the token. And those secrets have its own expiration dates. Do you ever consider some kind of automation to refresh them and provide them to the client, or is it always manual work?
I'm so glad you asked. The answer is no. My recommendation is to not use secrets, because secrets expire. And of course, you must think about it. Like, you can get back an error message from Azure that says the secret you were using is expired or incorrect. And then you could react on it, but then you are too late. So you must know it upfront. Now, you could create two secrets with a different expiration date. You store them both and say, okay, if one expires, I can fall back on the second one and give a message to refresh the first one. But the thing is that secrets are actually, by means of documentation, for development only. They should not be used in production. So my recommendation is, in production, you do not use secrets, you use certificates. And a certificate, you can use a self-signed certificate. For that, you don't have to buy a certificate. And a certificate can have a 10-year expiration time, whatever you define, or 30 years. The thing with a certificate is that it is actually consists of two parts, a private key and a public key. And the private key you keep in Business Central, and the public key, that's what you upload to Azure. So the public key is fine, everybody can see it. The private key stays in Business Central. And yes, I have code that can create that key in AL code, sorry, the certificate in AL, that can create an app registration, upload that public key, set the permissions, create grant the permissions, all of that. So rather than saying to the user, end user, hey, you need to go to Azure portal, you need to do this and copy a client ID and set permissions and do this and this, they just say, create app registration in the application. They allow Business Central to access Azure, an admin must do that, and it will create everything for you, including the permissions, including the certificate. That is actually what we need for customers. And I have customers working with that. It's quite some code, to be honest, but it works.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Final question, because otherwise the lunch is, this is lunchtime, I think. Shall we do this? Whoa.
Is there a way to debug a production environment, for example, snapshot or for web services?
Well, snapshot debugging, yes.
Okay. I couldn't get it to work, so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not going to demonstrate that now. Sorry. All right. Well, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, you can find me. Enjoy the rest.